Hello, folks. So, what does the picture below show? What things are you thinking about, and what do you think it has to do with memory? Well, hopefully you have recognised the five senses there. Yep, of course we have sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and they are kind of where all our memories start from. Um, when we experience the world, when we engage with it, we experience it through those senses. And they kind of start off memory, but they are not memory in itself. So we're going to be looking at the multi-store model of memory in this session today, which is lesson two. On there, we've done one which we had a bit of a play with some of those early studies, and we learnt those terms about capacity, duration, and those things there. That's going to help us to understand this. Our first proper model of memory. So this, under the revised specification, is officially where it starts off, but you have to know about the different aspects that we've covered effectively in the previous session. You have to know about encoding, you know about capacity, duration. So that first lesson, those studies, while they can't ask you any longer specific questions on there, the concepts themselves are in it, and you can use them to support um, the theory, or to reject the theory, or as a example, just a practical little laboratory experiment which you can look at on those things there. So let's push on. We're going to look at the multi-store model of memory in this session. So I just want to give you a couple of go though. What's this? What do these notes mean? Thursday, Tuesday, Denmark. Well, the answer is, to be honest, is nothing. That there's no meaning that you can really draw from here. You can't make sense of it. Now, in this case, actually, it would be about the idea that the days of the week are named after the Norse gods. So Thor's Day and Tyr's Day and Woden's Day or Wednesday. Um, those are all from the Norse gods, which are all part of Denmark on those things there. Now, did you get it from those? No, you didn't. What's happened is the person has written such brief notes that actually they're no longer useful. So what we do is when we are taking notes at university and at A level, we need to ensure that our notes are good and of quality. Okay, and this is normally a good point in the course to kind of reflect back and say, look, are you doing your notes to a high enough standard to actually make them useful? Okay, so I want you to kind of think about your notes and what you're doing. Well, your notes should really be kind of a filtering of the information you need. It's like a sifting process going through. So you're given text, you're given PowerPoints, you're given handouts, all those things there. And it's the idea that your notes should be you sifting through that information for important key parts, but also you're separating those out from unimportant parts. Now, it might be that there's some examples, etc., that you don't need to have in your core notes, but would be useful to know about or would help you explain a concept or practice doing questions or practicing these things. But it's a thing we have um, in our class notes. We may choose to focus down on the core aspects. So when you're writing them down, what you need to do is you need to make sure that what you are writing will be useful 6 months later. Yeah, i.e., that 6 months' time, when you potentially, if you never look back at it, although I strongly recommend you do on a regular basis, more regular than that, but say 6 months later, if you look back at it, because you haven't had time to get back to it, it should make sense to you. It should be genuinely useful and give you a deeper understanding than just your recollection alone. So what we're saying is that your notes will probably, and I know this sounds stereotypical, but there's reasonably good evidence to support this. If you're male, particularly, you tend to need to write longer notes than you are. Yeah, most males who underperform because they fail to um, have enough depth in the notes, undermining the AO1 quality, which undermines the AO2 and AO3 ability going through the exam. So try and make sure you're using full sentences rather than singular words, or rather than breaking it down into tiny little bullet points or broken language. Try and make sure it's going to be meaning for you later on. Okay, let's crack on with this. Okay, so first of all, the multi-store model of memory is the first model of memory. Okay, now why is that important? Well, to be honest, what you saw before in that first lesson was different things being tested out, being had a go at by lots of different people, but ultimately it wasn't necessarily a coherent, testable theory. So what they've done is they've gone out, they've collected up the information from the different studies, and they've pieced together a first version of how memory works. Now, like many things, the first versions is not the greatest version. Okay, things get updated, upgraded, changed, and tweaked, and all those things there. If you look at the first car, it was a Model T Ford. It was incredibly difficult by modern standards to keep it running. In fact, every 1,000 miles, it had to have a full service, new change of tyres, all those things there. Now, your car can probably go for 20,000 miles without being serviced. Much better on those things. You don't have this whole idea of double declutching. You don't have to put your foot on the clutch, push it down all the way, take it out of gear, put it in neutral, bring your foot back up, then push your foot back down, and then push it into gear, and then bring your foot back up, find the clutch right. No, that's double declutching. That was something which was part of the original Model T Ford. Well, now with a manual, you just do it once. If you've got automatic, you don't even do that. It does it all for you on there, or you can have that flappy paddles on some sports car. The point is, things progress, and this is the same for our scientific theories. Um, Darwin is a classic example of that. His theory of evolution has been updated multiple times on those things as they find out more on those things there. But when we also look at memory, we see Atkinson and Shiffrin's multi-store model, or MSM, by Atkinson and Shiffrin. They come up with this first theory, which is great, but it's only a first theory. Okay, so it's a big step forward, and that's one of the strengths of it. It is a big step forward for us. So let's just stop talking generally, right? Let's get more. Okay, so what's the key points that you really need to know for this theory? Well, first of all, you need to know there's three key stores. So we have the sensory memory, or register, and we have the short-term memory, and we have the long-term memory. Okay, and those are the three stores, and you need to know about the function and role of each, the different features it has, particularly in terms of capacity, how much it can hold, duration, how long it can hold, and encoding type, how it holds. So that's going to be some features which we know. But we also need to know how it moves information from one system to the next, which is in this way going to be both a strength of the model and also a weakness, because it shows us how information moves through the brain, but it also doesn't show us as clearly as it could other features. So here we go. This is the sort of visualization of the model. This is it drawn out. Now it comes from 1968. And as I say, it has been revised and tweaked and changed. But this is the original model. It doesn't say on your specification which one you have to have. So the joy of starting off with the most basic and first one is that we can also criticize and say, oh, this has been updated, this has been changed. But also, it's the simplest version of it. So, we start off with information coming from our senses. Okay, so the senses are not a store. They don't hold information, they send it straight down those nerve impulses. Now, those nerves have to turn information from vibrations or from particles or from light waves into something the brain can actually deal with. So we have what's called encoding happens. And so the information from our senses is encoded into a relevant form of information. We then see that reaches the sensory register. Now, the sensory register is massive. Okay, it's huge in terms of how much it can take in. But the problem is our sensory register, or sensory memory, as sometimes it's called, is only able to hold information for up to about 2 seconds. And it's also only, according to this theory, able to pass on a very limited stream of information to the next uh, next store short-term memory, and that's because we're paying attention to it. So I love to point out now, you're probably sat down. Um, I bet you've been sat down since the start of the lesson. If not, why have you been get up? Naughty. If you are sat down, then I bet you have not been thinking about the weight of your body on your bum on the seat until now. Yeah, you're now aware of it. You can now feel the seat pushing against your posterior, and you couldn't before. When you think back, you couldn't before. What? Why not? Was it not happening? Was it not there? Well, no, it was there. It was there from the start, but you weren't paying attention to it. This is the thing. Our brain has a limited attentional span. So actually, this is super important. We kind of funnel out most of the information that comes into our sensory register. So loads of things sensory um, that we're going through, we see being um, filtered out there and only passing on whatever it is we're paying attention to. So loads of information right there. One part of explanation of ASD for autistic spectrum disorder can be that they struggle particularly with switching away from physical sensations in the body to allow focus outside of the body. That can be one reason for challenges for both ASD but also ADD as well on there. Anyway, so moving on from our sensory register, if we pay attention to it, which hopefully pay attention to me, it should go into short-term memory. Now, short-term memory is, as it kind of says on the tin, a short-term store. But how long is short-term? Well, hopefully you've got a number for this. What number is it? Shout it out. Okay, I'm hopefully hearing between 18 to 30 seconds on that. That's generally what those studies from last lesson should have found for us. So hopefully if you said that, then yep, good work. And it can hold how many things? Yeah, hopefully I'm hearing 7 plus or minus 2 or 5 to 9, depending how you want to say it. Miller's magic number 7 is the one with the 7 plus or minus 2. Or you could just go for a range from 5 to 9, whichever one floats your boat. But how to keep things there? We'll have this thing called maintenance rehearsal, which basically we can say over and over again in our head to keep it going round. We have that auditory information. We tend to store things auditory, according to this theory, in our short-term memory. However, if that's interrupted or we don't get a chance to pass it on to long-term memory, things can be lost from there as well. So, however, if we do manage to keep it there long enough and process it enough, then we can transfer it into long-term memory. Now, long-term memory is that store which in theory stuff lasts up to a lifetime. We don't know about it past that because neurodegeneration following death is a problem. We can't really deal with that, so we can't say that memory lasts past a lifetime. We can only really say that memory lasts a lifetime. We haven't actually found an upper limit for how much people can do. So they say that capacity is unlimited, which is quite different than our sensory and short-term register. However, again, we'll look at some of the problems with it in a moment as well, and why we forget things. Okay, however, when we need things, when we need information, we have to call it back into our active memory store, known as the short-term memory. Okay, now we could do with some more information on that, but they don't give it to us, which is a bit of a problem. But what they do say is we have to have the ability to retrieve information. And so we retrieve information back in short-term memory where we can then do things like form and output. Okay, so that gives our ability to respond in some way to the world. So let's go through that super quickly once more, but using a question. Okay, I want you to answer me this question as soon as I ask it. Nice shout out, everyone. Okay, so what is, wait for it, it's going to be really hard, really challenging math question. Ready, steady. What is 4 plus 4? Okay, hopefully you all just said 8. Okay, but what you actually did was as follows. First of all, the sound waves from this video came through to you, to your ears, and that was then encoded into your sensory register. If you were paying attention, which hopefully you were, then that will have been passed on to your short-term memory. Maintenance rehearsal will keep that question there, 4 plus 4, in it, and you then reach into your long-term memory for your 4 times table, which you learnt back in probably year 1, year 2 of primary school. It comes back, retrieves that information in short-term memory. You then formed an output of how to do it, and then shouted out 4. Sounds like golf, doesn't it? No, obviously it was 8. 4 plus 4, 8. So what we have there is an output which has been produced, which is in this case a verbal response. Okay, so what we see is the way information moves through the model on there. So can you make sure that you've got a sketch of that, but also we're going to need to have a written explanation of it. So I'm going to give you a table to use. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Okay, so there you go. There's your table. And what I see, and you can use the textbook, standard green hair girl. It should be about 46, 48 to 49. I can't remember if I tweeted it to be updated one there. But if not, just have a look in the book. Find the multi-store model memory. It's there. It might be moved slightly earlier if you've got a more modern textbook on that. So what I see is like to use that to create a table of all the information you need. So you need a, first of all, description. I'll give you a top tip. You're going to probably need a bit more space for the description of each one of those. Then you're going to need to write down what the duration is, what the capacity is, and what the coding type is. And I'll say that actually I stole this format from a exam paper. Yep, straight out of exam paper by AQA. You had to fill in 3 of the boxes. 3 boxes were empty, the other information was there, and you had to go through and say what information should be in there. So it's relevant to both remembering it now, but also to past exam those. Okay, so we see that first of all we have the first store that senses come into information comes into the senses. It's high capacity but low duration. That most information is lost due to a lack of attention. Duration is up to half a second. Some people argue it's up to 2 seconds on there, but it's very, very brief. It's so brief we can't really measure it. That is a problem. Capacity again, it's so brief we can't really measure this. So they kind of saying what we believe it's many items. And the types of um, encoding that we see is iconic, which is to do with visual information, and echoic, which is to do with auditory information. So we see two different ways of it being stored there. Moving on to short-term memory. So it's the second store, which has our active attention. That's important. That will be relevant later on when we look at the next theory and also talk about progressional theories. So it's our active attention store, um, and is where we form our responses and solve problems. How? How do we do that? That'll be interesting. Do it tell us? Nope. Oh, that's a bit of an issue. Um, as well as the process information through rehearsal for storage in long-term memory. Um, let's move on to the next. So how long does it last? Up to 30 seconds. I've looked at a variety of texts, a variety of things there, and it does vary between 18 to 30 seconds there. But you know what? The exam board is fairly consistent putting exam criteria for the mark scheme, 30 seconds. So you know what? That's the one I put there. Okay, capacity, again, we can say 7 plus or minus 2, or we could say 5 to 9. But that's the range on those things there. And then it stores information acoustically. So that's important. Information is not stored generally, it's stored acoustically. The third store is our long-term memory, and it keeps the long-term information in the longer time period for a longer duration. Okay, and it can store and both have information retrieved from it. It can last up to a lifetime. It's thought to be unlimited, and it stores information, interestingly, semantically based upon its meaning, which is quite different than before. Okay, move on. This is a quick bit. There is a bit later on which we talk about forgetting all that sort of stuff. But I just want to flag this up. The reason why I flag this up is it's relevant to you on your courses because basically there's an issue with how people forget things. Okay, so what we see here is that first of all, most information that ever comes into our senses isn't paid attention to. Okay, so most information actually is filtered out in the sensory memory, which means it decays. So it decays prior to it ever being able to be recorded. So that's one of the reasons why we have that as an issue. Okay, so moving on, then we see the idea. So I just click, so we've got that first one there. Moving on from short-term memory, we can either have information basically not making it in because it's full. So it's like going to a nightclub, they turn it up, you turn up and say, oh no, it's full. There's too much information in already, can't do it. Or you have it the other way, that it could get pushed out. So imagine being in that club and they say, oh, we've got people coming in. So actually, you know what? We're going to kick you out in order to let more people come in. You might go to a restaurant if you stay too long. A lot of places have now a limited time for bookings. Anyway, the point is short-term memory, either information get pushed out before it's been transferred over, or there's not enough room at the end, so to speak, so it can't go in the first place and it decays away. That is often where we lose a lot of information from short-term memory. And finally, and this one really is important to know when it comes to long-term memory for you guys, because you guys got a colossal amount of information to learn over the next couple of years. But not just learn, but retain. That's a biggie. Your ability to retain information will, to a large extent, affect whether you are able to get a good grade at A-levels or not. So let's talk about how you actually lose information, things you've learned before. Okay, so we basically it comes down to two ways of losing information. One is you have an accessibility issue. So you lose the connection to the memory so that you cannot access it. Two, you have an availability issue. So in this case, the memory itself is lost and so can't be recalled. Now, in order to help us throughout our A levels and degrees and other things there, what I'm going to say to you is this piece of advice. And if you pay attention to me now, you are going to be a student who gets a grade above a C, towards B's, A's, etc. If you don't listen to me now, you will be a student who struggles and may get an ED. So listen up. In order to prevent you forgetting all the stuff you're learning, you must go back over it on a regular basis. Now, the reason for this is that firstly, you are much more likely to encounter accessibility issues if the links to those memories have been lost because you haven't gone over it on a regular basis. So accessing those knowledge, accessing those thoughts will help maintain it. Secondly, availability. As you use it, as you go through and use this information on a regular basis by practicing making question cards, by quizzing each other, by doing uh, you know, mind maps or whatever it is that suits you, whatever it is there, by using the information on a regular basis, the memory itself gets stronger. Yeah, it's like painting it with another coat of paint every single time you walk past it. If you paint that, then you know what? It's going to be really thick with paint by the let's have a quick look at some of the evidence there. So I'd like to have a look at the book. There's a few pieces of information there, but I'm going to also whiz you through some bits here. Okay, so we've got the case of HM, and HM showed that there's a separate locations in the brain for different parts of memory. So quite a useful one there. You can have a quick Google of him if he's not in the textbook. But Clive Waring, I also attached to his YouTube video there. So if you pause this one and watch that one, that'd be great. You can find out what happened there. And the theorist for Clive Waring is Warrington in 1970. Warrington was the researcher that worked with him there. Then we also have very famously the case of KF. Now, KF is actually quite awkward because KF is a study which proves there's an issue with the multi-store model memory. But in doing so, it also shows support for the next theory. So it's kind of one that's really, really good to know. And I'll even give you a little mnemonic in a few minutes to help you remember the KF case study. Okay. We've also got support from Glantz and Knitz. What I like to do is I like to go through and I'd like you to look at the studies. I'd like you to do a little bit of evaluation for and against that. And I've, to help you, just modelled the answer here. So again, we've got that framework. So point, evidence, explain, link back, that peel technique, the signpost, nice and clear there. And this is me going through Glantz and Knitt's study, which I'm going to go through in more detail in a second on the next slide. But I'm just showing you this one. Okay, so support for the multi-store model memory is the serial position curve by Glantz and Knitz in 1966. And it showed that long-term and short-term are separate stores. Now the evidence of that, primacy and recency effects show that short-term memory and long-term memory must be different stores as the multi-store model memory claims. Then I need to explain that by the fact that you can have one affected but the other not if you use the delay task. Therefore, there's empirical research to support the multi-store model memory assertion of the different stores. So what I like to do is, I say, go through, look at the case of HM, look at the case of Clive Waring, look at the case of Shias and Warrington, and also Creek and Watson. Um, they are in the textbook. Please go through, peel them out, and then we will restart the video. Okay, from this, I'm assuming you have done that evaluation. You've got those notes, you've peeled them out, you've got that information there, you're ready to smash it. Okay, I just want to quickly then go through Glantz and Knit's. Reason why is because it happens to be a favourite study of your examiners, as in they keep on using it or referencing it in a few different places, which could be helpful. So I want you to look at that data. Just look at that what that graph has on it, and I'd like you to consider these two questions. You can talk to the person next to you about what you think, um, but I'd like to go through and say, what does this graph show, and why is it a support for the multi-store model of memory? Okay, just spend a few minutes talking it through, and then we'll go through it as a group. Okay, let's go through this. So what does it show? Well, put simply, it shows us that there's better recall for both groups at the start of the list, and that's called primacy effect. However, for both groups, there's poor recall in the middle of the groups, in the middle of the word list. Yet, for just one of the groups, in this case, the group who had no delay, they then have this upsurge at the end of the word list, which seemed to help them to recall the words more accurately than the other group. What was it? Well, so the first part, remembering those, is what we call primacy. So the primacy effect, that is what we see happening with both of them at the start, where your short-term memory is empty, and then you start learning the word list. And then that means that information goes into your short-term memory, has enough time to be processed, and is then transferred into your long-term memory effectively. And that's where you then recall it from. However, the middle words, your short-term memory is already full and you haven't yet finished transferring over the long-term memory words, and as such, that will lead to those words being lost, which we see in both groups. However, when we look at the end of the graph, we see that for one group, they're able to have better performance. Now, they didn't have a delay task. Now, this delay or interference task required them to, I believe in this case, it was read some poetry for 3 minutes. And they had to go through it and use it, and it prevented them from recalling those words from their short-term memory, because their short-term memory only lasts 30 seconds, and they made them count for 2 minutes afterwards, or read poetry for 2 minutes afterwards. It just prevents them from being able to keep that information in their short-term memory, because a similar type of information coming in and pushing it out. So that is why we see the difference in performance between the two groups. But what is a big and important fact is that we can affect deliberately the long-term memory or the short-term memory. So in this case, it shows you that they both had good recall from long-term memory, but they had one of them had poor recall from just one, while the other was still good. And this shows us that the long-term memory and short-term memory must be different stores. If we're to understand it, they must be different stores. And because of that, this then means we can say that the Glances and Knits, with their recency and primacy effect, supports the multi-store model of memory, because it demonstrates that there must be a long-term memory and a separate short-term memory, which other people argue is not the case. Okay. So what's the strengths? What's the criticisms here? Well, a big thing, a big support for this one is the fact that it is actually bringing together um, a set of knowledge, and it's showing that there is um, a unified theory which we can then base things on. Um, it also provides a framework of three memory stores, which each and the existence of each seems quite well supported. Finally, it allows psychologists to devise further studies to test out the ideas that are being put forward. Now, I have to teach you about the features of science. And one of the main features is this idea of carrying out research, producing a theory, testing the theory, using the studies, and then updating or revising and tweaking and improving, developing the theory, and then starting that cycle again, carrying out research based on it and tweaking it and going through. Now, this, as I said, is the first theory, and there's many to come which will change and challenge and do those things there and progress it. But that is the strength of this. Yeah, it's not claiming that there's things are, 100% accurate. All this, it is a start point. That's it. But it is a good start point to start from. So the problems we have with it, and this is why it's only a start point, it lacks detail over how each part really works. For instance, how does short-term memory solve problems? We want to know, how does it solve problems? How, where exactly in short-term memory does it? Because you know what? It doesn't say. And the next updated one, the next one will come along and give us a bit more information on that, hopefully, or at least it claims to. And then in our second one, we have the fact that both short-term memory and long-term memory don't seem to just be one type of store, so that each of them seem to break down further. Unfortunately, we no longer cover different types of long-term memory as the course, but I'll tell you now that when you're learning to drive, you are learning a procedure. Yeah, you're learning a procedure, how to control the car, all those things there. That is procedural knowledge. Um, when you're learning your French and you're learning your different verbs and all those things there, that is learning um, semantic information. However, when you're recalling going on holiday to France and driving there, that was your episodic memory. Um, and the difference is that procedural, you can do it without actively thinking about it, but the other two require active thought. So my point is, there's three different types of long-term memory, in which we only have one being covered by the multi-store model of memory, and that, as I say, is not good enough. We also have ideas of rehearsal versus processing. A guy called Tolving came along and said it's not about um, the processing, the rehearsal, amount of rehearsal. It's how you process it, how you do it, how you think it through. And he basically comes through and says, actually, it's more about the depth of processing, or as he calls it, the levels of processing through his theory there. But unfortunately, again, no longer spec as an official point there. But what I can say is here, people discuss that we need more than just, for instance, that word transfer to get things into your long-term memory to understanding that. So again, there's an issue there. There's also some people who argue that short-term memory and long-term memory at points and in some way are so connected that actually they argue that they are related in some way, that maybe one system on there. But let's, we've got enough points, so let's skip past that fourth one. Okay. Let's look at some common questions in this area. So you might get one which asks you, For instance, how does information pass from one system to another? So in this case, we've got short-term to long-term memory. That's the one you could quite easily have a go at. And you get the first mark for saying the word um, by rehearsal. The second mark in that would be explaining what you mean by that. Then we've got describe sensory memory, so that they can pick a specific part of any model, any theory. They can ask you to describe that, just as they can ask you to do it for any part of a theory, any part of a study, any part of an approach, etc. Be aware of that, and it means we need sometimes to know more depth than we anticipate. They don't just ask you a 6 mark question to outline the whole theory. They can be quite precise at times. And it's their way of driving up the quality of knowledge we will have to have. And it's something to watch out for. So there you go. You can see that question. That's not an unusual type of question to have. Third, we've got describe one strength. We could also have it saying one weakness, but I've just picked on one strength of the multi model memory. So in this case, this answer requires you to go into depth to develop the point properly. Oh God, I wish I had like a strategy that would help me every time I need to do this to get. Oh, I do. Yes, I do. I signpost it and I peel it. I make it appealing to my examiner by signposting and making it appeal by going point, evidence, explain, and then link back. Now, I want to point out that without the evidence, you end up being vague. But without the explanation, you end up not demonstrating you fully understand your point, and that means you won't end up being effective. And this is the thing: your your third and fourth point are about making it effective. You look at the mark criteria for any question in which we're looking at you doing evaluation. The word effective is in there, and whether you are deeming it to be effective or not matters when it comes to this answer. So trust me, if you use that method, you're going to nail it. If you don't use that method, you're going to find it much harder to be hitting the high marks. In psychology, in a 4 mark question, you want to always at least hit 3 on those wherever possible, because an A is normally about 75%. And if you can hit that, if you can hit 75%, that would be 3 marks in this question. Then you know what, you're doing okay. You're gonna set yourself up for a good way. So, and then we see the next one. Describe and evaluate the multi-store model of memory. Oh, that is a lovely and easy question. I've seen it once or twice, or once like that, once or twice, and it comes up with this. You then get given a box, which I want you to instantly look at and go, right, I'm going to draw a line down that box about a third way along. The reason for that is because I need to spend more time doing my evaluation than doing my description. But what is it I need to cover? You're then going to put in your key terms for there. So I've got about sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. Remember, you can quit register on there. We've also got coding, capacity, duration, processing through the MSM. That's going to help me. There's some of the key terms on this in there. I do not want to overwrite that, but I want to make sure that I cover those, because if I do that, I'm going to end up with a really precise, effective explanation, which is going to then enable me to have some good evaluation, which is going to enable me to end up in this band 3 to band 4 answer. Okay, so I'll then put the following points on there. I'm going to use Clive Waring as a support. I've got good old KF as a criticism. My sneaky one to help you remember KF is finger licking good. Yep, it's a chicken reference. If you heard of KFC, it's a big chicken brand, isn't it? But when we look at the case study, or KF, he could process visual information, not verbal information. Now, what that means is we can have a little cheeky mnemonic of KFC, as in KF can see, as in KF can process visual information, but can't process verbal. Okay, so I use KFC as a little mnemonic to help me remember that. Tolving goes through also and breaks down the different parts of the long term memory. He talks about procedural, episodic, semantic, and he shows the different ways of doing things. And so that's something that this theory misses. And as such, this theory is not yet as developed as it needs to be. Okay, so that is my plan for the 16 marker. Let's have a quick scroll through on to the next bit. So what is it we need to do in 60 marker? Well, yeah, we need to say how it goes through, and we need to cover all those different ones. We evaluating, we can give a few different points on there. I say that's what I'm saying on the description. And then when I'm saying about the evaluation, we're looking to give one or two supporting points. Let's say why it's support always important, or we could give one or two critical studies. Say why their criticisms. Be really clear. Make sure you signpost it and you explain why. You are not going to be effective if you do not explain why it's a problem. I don't get why you think that's wrong, why you think it's a problem. Tell me. Assume I'm thick. Make it really clear. Okay? Don't say it. If you just imply it, I can't credit it. We could also look at going at two strengths, explain them fully. We could also say, for instance, two weaknesses on those things there. But this is just a variety of ones. You wouldn't put all those by any means, but they're all options that you could use. Okay, so let's have a quick look at a model for the essay. Okay, so here we can see it go through on there. We've got some nice signposting picking it up straight away. We've got quite a lot of specialist terms. You know what? Let's go examiner eye. How am I seeing this when I'm looking at examiner? I'm looking at it like this. Okay, wow. Every single term that's bolded is a key term. So we're seeing quite a lot of specialist language being used throughout this answer. Okay, I've also put on a word count roughly to guide you because you don't want to be overwriting, but also you don't want to be underwriting. When I'm marking a 60 marker, if I see it's lasting less than a page, I know that this is going to be less than half marks unless you've got tiny writing, which I would always encourage you to increase the size of, folks. Please stop making your examiners strain their eyes. It doesn't help you to get that extra benefit of the doubt. So try and write in a reasonable size, please. When we go through, we then see this answer is it's about 460 odd words. I give you a rough guide of 500 roughly on their word count. Okay, that's going to generally be the right sort of length. If you can't write that in 20 minutes, you need to work on it. So the standard advice I give you is get a sheet of paper, pick the thing that you, at the time you are feeling you could say the most about, and set a timer for 10 minutes and start writing. When the timer goes off at 10 minutes, see how many words it is you've written. Okay? Make sure it's something which is just going to flow at you on there. We're practicing for fluency and motion of hand on there. If you get, say, 200 and you need to get 250, well, what you're going to do, you're going to, each week, you're going to keep on doing that 10-minute writing task, doing those things there, trying to write a little bit quicker each time. Don't just write A because that's not going to work. It's not actually helping yourself. You're just literally mugging yourself off. So you go through and you practice that until you're consistently hitting 250 words in 10 minutes. Okay, then switch it to be a 20-minute activity, and then you can try doing it on exam questions and that as well. This will help you in every single subject you have. If you are typing, then you need to be able to do this on a computer and type this up there. Okay, so that needs to be you for that on that. If you can't do that, you have to work on it. We cannot give you more time unless it's been allocated in the exam. So you need to work on that skill. So do. Okay. Anyway, that's the example there. Look at the mark scheme for this one. This is a straight 16 marker. No application on there. So knowledge is, it is well detailed. occasional accuracies, one or two little bits could be tweaked just to make it a little bit sharper. Um, evaluation was given as mostly effective. There's a few points where they could develop or have a little more depth on it, but it's good. It's definitely good. We have clear, coherent, and focused throughout the essay, yes. But again, specialist terminology could be used a little bit more effectively, but generally it's used quite well. Uh, that's the difference. Um, Mostly using um, specialist terminology and using it effectively is a difference. Knowing the term and using it in the right way makes a difference. Okay. Um, so when we look down here, we see band three, 12 marks is maxing out there. The good points is good knowledge and understanding, clear and effective structure, relevant critical points. Where can we get better? How can we push it? And that's the key thing. We want a little bit more development and some depth in the description and criticism to boost for those final marks. Okay, but you know what? That's still going to be the sort of essay that you keep on getting, 3/4 of the marks on there. You're going to be hitting an A star. Okay, you know what? I think that's pretty good. Right, okay. Thank you very much. And can you make sure that you go over this and lock this down? Because next time we're going to be building on this knowledge and we need to make sure that you are ready for it.